Everybody, a very good evening. Welcome to the class and thanks for joining. So today we are going to discuss about the Python Flask tutorial. So my name is Krishna. Most of my work is related to Python programming. So I've been working there for a quite long time. And starting with Python Flask, let me start with this is the agenda of our topic today. So this is our we are going to discuss. We'll start discussing what is actually a Flask, how to install it, what is actually a Flask application, what does it mean by routing in Flask, what does it mean by templates in Flask, and what are the Flask extensions available. Then we will do hands-on if time permits, but mostly I'm thinking about doing hands-on now and then. Now starting with Python. So what do you mean by Python? Python is basically general purpose language, which means it is not tied up to any particular domain. You can use it like you guys said, web-based applications. You can use it in ML. You can use to build data science application. You can use to build any kind of automation. You can use to build object-oriented programming stuff, anything of that sort. There's no limitations to it. That's why I said it's a general purpose language. And you see, it's an object-oriented programming. So object-oriented programming paradigm is generally used to handle more complex projects. Wherever you have a lot of complex projects, this is the style you should go. And Python basically provides two types of programming styles. One is procedure oriented, another is object oriented. Procedure oriented is where your focus will be taking a program and dividing that into multiple functions. Object oriented, where your focus will be taking a problem and breaking them into multiple objects where they interact together and make your project work. High level language, it simply means a English like language. Anything you write in English, you can say English like. High level language. Easy to learn, yes, it is very easy to learn compared to other languages because there is less syntax to learn, less conventions, less notations to learn. And it's an interpreted language. That means whenever there is an error, it stop, and unless you fix it, it will not go move to the other line of it. That's the best part of it. And it was created by a scientist called 𝐑𝐸𝐻. And like I called out, it's easy to learn because there is less syntax, less semantics to remember, because the same syntax of one data structure if you learn, that will be reused again and again when you go for other type of data structures or concepts in the language. Now, this is not our main discussion. Our discussion is on Flask. Like I said, since Python is a general purpose, it means you can use it for anything. Yes, without using an external database, but create it with a coding. Yes, you can. So if you go for like, for example, as you said, without using an external database, if you want to create, yes, you can. There is a SQLite 3 database, which is what default comes with Django. And for Flask also, you can integrate without creating any external database. You can do that, Ambrose. Okay, since our discussion is more about Flask, let's understand it. Like I said, it is a general Python is a general purpose language, which means you can use it for anything. Like here, we are going, our topic of discussion is how to use it for web applications. So what is a web application? Web application is nothing but a framework or a application framework where you have lot of components available or lot of things organized in a way so that you can do web development faster. That's called web application framework. You don't need to worry about when a request comes, should I have to span multiple threads? When a request comes, how to process it, how to pass the HTTP headers. These all things you don't need to worry about. Web application framework takes care of it. That's what called as a web application framework. And Flask is one of the web application framework. There are other web application frameworks also like Django, Tornado and all. But Flask is one of the popular one. It's a micro web application framework. And this is created by a scientist called, I didn't remember his name, but his name Amron. I didn't remember his full name. And it's open source. You can use it. I mean, that when I say open source, the code on which the Flask is entirely written in Python that you can see available in internet. And it has a large community for learners. That means the people like us, as well as collaborators. That means who work on building things, improving things in Flask. Now, what is a web framework? Like I already called out, web framework is nothing but a bunch of modules and libraries which actually help and make the job of web developer easy. Because generally, if you look at web development, what need to happen is whenever a request comes from a client, the web server has to take it and process it. If you look at a plain bottom level, if you have written some shell script which does this job, you have to take the request, then process the headers to see what type of content is, then actually after processing the data, when you're sending the data back also, you have to put some headers so that the client browser can render it. All this you need to worry about. And if there are multiple requests, you need to worry about multiple processing and all. With web app framework, what would happen is you will get multiple libraries and applications available to deal with all of it. That means as a web developer, you don't need to worry about the low level details. You just need to worry about, hey, there is a request, I will process and send it back. That's it. No header, nothing of that low level stuff. That's the good advantage you get with any web framework. Without Flask, like I said, you need to do a lot. Since Flask is a web application framework, you can just worry about the coding part. You don't need to worry about the low level details of web application framework because the framework deals with it automatically. Now coming to Flask, Flask actually was created by a set of Python enthusiasts. It's like international group of Python enthusiasts, or where actually just like how you have these PyCon and all groups who actually conducts this Python conference, there are multiple Python groups. This is one of the Python group name called POCO, where they have created this 𝐿SA template engine as well as the �WSGI toolkit. �WSGI stands for Web Server Gateway Interface. It's a specification where that talks about how a server and client has to respond, in what way the request should be, in what way the response should be. Everything will be there. And these guys have created something called 𝐓𝐫𝐞𝐁 WSGI toolkit. It's actually German. It simply means, I think it's German or European. It means work stuff, something like that. Where they actually created toolkit that is very, very popular. And for any web server frameworks, this is one of the toolkit which is more advanced in nature to be used. And 𝐿SA 2, it's actually called 𝐿SA 2. It's actually a template engine. It's improved so much these days. And how to install Flask? So there are a lot of steps, like you have to create a virtual environment by running some commands. Like first you have to install this in Windows. Then if you are using Unix users, you have to install this. And you have to do a lot if you're not using any editor, and you have to create a directory and enter into that, then do this virtual environment so that it creates a virtual environment for you. Then you have to activate in Windows. Then once you have done that, this is the step to install Flask. And believe me, instead of all this, if you use an editor called PyCharm automatically creates virtual environment for everything you do. So let me show you. I'm using PyCharm, and you see this virtual environment is by default created for every project you do. You don't need to worry about it. All you need to worry about is install Flask, which you can do from here just by typing pip install Flask. You can just say pip install Flask, and that's it. You don't need to do all this commands. So I would suggest you to go for PyCharm. In fact, for web development framework, PyCharm makes a lot of things easier. It gives a lot of good suggestions and all that. So I would suggest you to stick to PyCharm. PyCharm, you will get a free edition also. There's a community edition as well as professional. Use the community one. And Visual Studio also is equally popular. In the Flask application, once you install Flask using pip install, this is the basic application where this thing says from Flask, that means from your Flask library, import a Flask module. And this Flask module will give the Flask instance. So here I'm creating a Flask instance, then Flask __ name. The __ name indicates my current module, which is in this case __ main. So that's the app I got. And here is what it tells me. So how actually Flask tells me is that whenever I give a URL, like let's say http www.xyz.com/, it actually looks at the URL based on that. This is like a decorator where I'm saying whenever you see in the URL / trigger this function. That's what it says. So let me show you that quickly, the same thing here, so that you can understand things much better. So let me show you my first demo. This is my program. So let me run this guy quickly. I just ran. So when you ran, what would happen is, so it opened a development server for you. So this is the one. Flask by default comes with a default test server, or you can say development server, that is used to test your things. Once you are very well versed that things are going fine, then you can deploy into a proper production server like Apache and all. So until then, if you want to test, there's a development server already built in. And that development server is what you are triggering from here, app.run, and it automatically triggers. Now it says whenever you see /, this is the function triggers where it says hello world. Now let me go back to the URL And URL, if you see, I don't need to type it. You see here, it's already saying by default Flask opens your web page in the default port 5000, but you can change any port if you like. You can even change the IP also. But this is the local host. That means your default port. I opened it, and you see that it automatically said hello world. How does it know that it has to say hello world? Is because I marked it like whenever user says slash, this is what I have written. If you look at, I said whenever user gives slash, which is nothing but 137.0.0.1, this one slash, it automatically binds to this function hello world. That's what I have said here. So instead of hello world, if I say hello world, how are you, that's what going to come here. Now all you need to do is just refresh. I think the changes didn't take effect. Let me close it and run it again. See, hello world, how are you? So automatically, whatever you change, so I'm binding that function with the URL. So Flask is more about how you bind your URLs with the functions. Whenever you do development, you have a lot of these URLs and all, right? You can easily bind with any of the functions and you can keep writing the code. You don't need to worry about how things work and all. That's one best part. This is called URL routing, where you're routing the URL to a particular function. We'll see more about this in the slides. Now, we talked about it. Underscore name represents your underscore name, which is nothing but your main module. This app.route, that is what we have written as a decorator at the rate app.route, where the first one says which URL it has to bind to, and the next one says what are the parameters you want to pass to the function. In case if the function takes any parameters, in our case it didn't take any parameters as such. So you can see that when you run app.run, we have by default it takes your local host, but if you want, you can mention any of these parameters. These are all optional by default. And when I say host, like I said, it defaults to this, but if you want to listen to any other IP, you can give it. And port also, it defaults to 5000, which we have seen. If you want, you can change it as well. And debug mode, if you want, you can turn it. I will show you how to turn debug mode also. It's pretty simple. All you need to say is just say debug equal to true. And if you want to forward it to any of the 𝐓𝐫𝐞 server, that also you can do. So by default, this is what comes up. Now, how do we turn on the debug mode? So one, by just starting the run method, and in that run method, you can call. So there are other steps also, like you have to say this, and all. Instead of that one, I'll go for this approach, because here you have to say this app.debug equal to true, then app.run. Other than that, I can just say app.run debug equal to true. The advantage which doing this debug equal to true is, in case if there are any issues, you can easily debug and understand if there is anything problem there. Like that's one best part here. So if there is any error, so debugging will be easier. So now there are no issues, but in case if there are issues, it will tell you the proper problems, what is happening here, all that. If there is any issue why in your code, it will give you the proper information there. That's the advantage with the debug. Now coming to routing part. So what does it mean by routing is, how do you route one function to a particular, from a particular URL, how do you route? Like one we have seen, we have put at the rate app.route slash. That means just you give 127.0.0.1 and automatically it routes to that particular function hello world. Here, apart from that, you can put it something like \hello, which means the URL should be having \hello and automatically it will call this function. That's what it means. You can also define called add URL role instead of this one if you want. This is a decorator way of doing a Pythonic way. Apart from that, if you want, you can use a function also to bind an URL with a function. This and this is one and the same. Just the here we are using decorators. Here it is just a function. So like you see, instead of doing on the head, I feel this is easier and more Pythonic. Rather than that, if you want, you can remove this and you can write at the end app.add URL rule like this. That means after slash hello, anybody gives in URL, automatically this hello world function will get called. That's what it means here. Now, so there are like certain variable rules here. So what does it mean by variable is, like you see there is less than greater than. I would suggest to let's show small demonstration on it. So you see I'm also putting the same thing. So what does it mean is, so here you understand now that whenever somebody puts \hello slash something here, automatically this function gets called. That's perfectly fine. Now what is this less than name is, which means any kind of name comes that I can take it here, I can take it and pass it here, and this function can take it as an argument and tell me. That means if I say /hello /Krishna, that will be passed as a function parameter to this hello name, and I can print it. That means I can process the URL parameters, which is part of the URL, and I can process if I want. So let me show you this. So let me run this. So if I run this guy now, actually I haven't defined any code for this URL. Earlier I said slash means hello, isn't it? So if I want, I can define saying if I just put slash, maybe you can just call this function saying hello, and I can put the code. But since I haven't put the code, it is not coming. I can just put it this. That means when it is slash, you call this code. That's what it means. Since I haven't put that earlier, that's why it is coming like this. Now you see it is there. Now if I refresh, see hello world is coming. In that, one more thing I showed you, that \hello \something you can give. That's the other URL pattern I've defined. That means if I say \hello /Krishna, that means it will say Krishna. This is a variable parameter. Instead of that one, if I say Ambrose, who is one of our learner, it will say hello Ambrose. Instead of that one, like Shadrach, anybody's name I can put. How it knows that this is the name I have to take is, I already told it here, \hello, and you have to put in less than greater than. That's it. And that name you can take it as a parameter. So simple, pretty simple, right? You don't need to do much around there. That's one good thing about it. That's what called variables. You can make your code dynamic. You see, we just putting like this, as simple as that. That's how you make the URL dynamic. That means based on whatever you give, we'll send the message back to you. Similarly, you can even do more. If you want, you can pass integer, float. We already have seen the string. Whatever name you are entering, that's a string. Similarly, if you want integer, float, we can even pass that. If you want path, you can even put that as well. I'll show you some of these. Like here, they are showing you about blog, revision and all. Let me show you also this quickly. So if you see here, the same thing I'm doing, but little change. So if you see this one, I am saying anybody who gives the URL blog, you just give them int post ID. That means it should be integer. That's what I'm saying. They have to enter a number and it should be integer after blog / some number. Similarly, after /rev / some float number, then this function will get called. For this URL root, this function will get called. For this URL root, this function gets called. But I haven't defined any code for, if you see, just for slash, that means the plain 137, this one I haven't defined. So when I run this, obviously it will say this error, right? Because I haven't defined any code for it. So if I want, I can write it just like how I showed you earlier. Like I can put this code there so that even if there is a dummy URL, that means no content, I can just simply display this. Okay, what does it say? Like I can put it if I want, but here I'm interested in other things, so I haven't put it there. Let me stop. And now you see this code is coming. Now the next part, I have given another URL roots also, \blog /blog. So if you see, I said /blog /14. It says blog number is 14. How it knows the blog number is 14? Because I said after that user is supposed to give integer. If he entered integer, I'm going to take it as post ID and I will say blog number is this. Right? So you cannot enter float because I already said the data type is that. So it will say like this if you do like that. Like that, you can enter any integer number. Similarly, for float also, I have showed you one more thing where I said revision. After that, user is going to enter revision number that you are going to save it. So the URL route is now /rev revision and 1.5, maybe some Python version like that. It says revision number is 1.4. Similarly, you say Python recent version is 3.10.1. 3.10 is the revision number, like that. And similarly, I have shown you how to pass string also. This is the string one. You just don't need to say anything, just after name, put something, and that username we can give. So if you say something like user slash hello, then it will say, okay, is that URL route correct? I said name. That's why it is not coming. See, it matches the exact URL, whatever you're given. So instead of this one, I should have given name. Okay, still wrong. This is what I was supposed to enter. If I enter now, it says username given is hello. Similarly, if I change another name, it will change accordingly. If I say Simran, Sherman, any name. So this is how you can pass integer, float, or string, and you can take and do something. You can even process also. Here we just showing it. That's what being shown here. This is integer, this is float. I have showed you the string part also. We have seen this, isn't it? Now, similarly, one thing to understand here is when you are giving this route, always remember this \python / means you can either enter like this or this, because this is about the canonical URL and all concept. But I don't want to deep dive into what are those canonical URLs and all. But just remember that \python, if you write it like this, / with slash before and after the particular URL route, it means it is equal to this URL route also, where there is no trailing \. But if you write specifically like this, it does not equal to this. So just remember that, because sometimes people expect this and they give this and they are seeing URL is not resolving, because URL route you have put it here clearly, then it will not match to this. But if you have put this, then it will match to this notation as well as this notation also. That's one thing to keep in mind. These are actually the URL route roles. And coming to Flask URL binding, we are already seeing that URL route. So here, if you see here, the scenario is little different. The scenario is something like, let's say you are taking some input from the web, and based on the URL, whatever you pass, you want to redirect to a different URL. Let's say that being the scenario. Let's say, for example, if user is a normal user, you want to consider him as guest. That means it's a different URL, different page you have to take. Like if you remember, whenever you log into a website, if you are the administrator of that website, you will get a different page, isn't it? If you are a normal user, you will get a different page, which they call it as guest page. Now, how they do it? Actually, it actually happens through URL redirection, where based on the username and password, it authenticates and figures out whether you are an administrator or not. And if you're an administrator, you have a complete admin privileges to all their website, and you will get a different page altogether. Whereas for guest, it is a different page. The same thing we will simulate here. Okay, so same thing we will simulate here. Let me quickly show you that. So this is that code. First, let me run it. After that, I'll show you. So if I say user/admin, so it tells me hello admin sir. Instead of user/admin, if I don't give admin, here I didn't put any authentication, but the idea here is you should get a different page. If I say Krishna, it will say hello Krishna, you logged in as guest user. So actually what was happening is, if you see, just closely observe, the URL is changing. If it is administrator, takes you to a hello admin sir, and you are at this page. But whereas when you do the admin thing, it is coming to the admin page. Whereas when you give something like user/Krishna or anything, any name, it is taking you to the guest page. So there is a URL redirection happening. So how it is happening here is, first of all, I have written code for saying user, I will take any name. And I binded this particular URL to this function. And here I'm checking if name is admin, redirect this URL to hello admin. Otherwise, redirect this URL to hello guest URL. That's what I'm saying. And I'm passing the guest parameter. So what is this hello admin is? Hello admin is another function I have written, where I said whenever username is given admin, you just get to this URL and just say hello admin sir. But if username is not admin, you redirect to this particular function, which is hello guest, where it says hello, you are logged in. So you see here, this redirect is the one which actually helping you to move from one URL to another. And this URL for function is to tell which particular function it has to move towards from where it is now. That's what it says. Okay, this is how I am redirecting from a particular page to another page based on the name which they have given on the URL page. Maybe when you develop, you can do some authentication, do all that as well. This is just a simple example to show you how to redirect from one URL to another. Okay, now let's talk about HTTP methods. You all know about what are HTTP methods, right? It's get, post, and all. So the same code we are discussing URL for. As we know, these are the HTTP different methods. You have get, post, which all know. Apart from that, there are others also like head, post, head, put, and delete. Get is to basically get the data, over your URL mostly, where most of the time that data will be unencrypted form. That means anybody can see it. If it is any non-confidential information, you can always send through get. These are all different HTTP methods. If you don't want to keep the content open and want to send the content in a secure fashion, you can always use this post request where your content is served through the body of the HTML rather than through the URL. Mostly get means mostly through the URL the request data will pass. Rather than that, if you want to pass your data over the request body, you can use post. So post is more secure than get, but for simple non-confidential requests, you can always send to get. Head is same as get, only thing is it doesn't have the response body. Whereas put actually helps you to replace all the current representations of whatever target resources with the uploaded content. Whereas delete, just delete all the current representations of target resource for a URL. That means if you say this URL I'm hitting and delete all the resources of which are there on the server side, you can use delete, provided you should have the proper privileges. So now we've been talking about this for a while, that I'm just doing with Flask and all, but generally if you see web development, how it happens, there is a HTML page which actually gets rendered in the browser, and once you give some input to that HTML, that is where the request goes and backend code at the server side gets executed. Now the same thing if you want to do in Flask, you can do that. Whatever we have seen are very basic examples. So right now what I was showing is this is a basic HTML page, a login.html, and behind the scene this is your backend code where actually it reads both your post and get request, and whenever there is a post, it reads the request from the form. Here we have built a form. If you clearly look at, this is a HTML form. You see this is a form and the page name is login.html, where it builds a form and takes name as input, and when you click submit, the backend code is this, which we have written in Flask, which actually takes and understand if you are doing post or get. If you are doing post, it will take the request from your form, and your form name is nm. And for that URL, it will just say URL for success name. So it is redirecting to this guy, and he will say welcome, whatever you have given. Similarly, if it is get, it will just get use this different function here, request.args to get, because the data will be as part of the URL if it is get request. Then from there, it again redirecting to the same function. That's what it is doing here. Okay, so before we move on to the templates, let me show you this quickly. So I have this login.html, the same thing. And here I have the code which actually reads that login.html. And from that login.html, it reads and processes it. So let me start my server first. I started my server. Now this is where my server is started. Now I will open my HTML page. Here is where my HTML page open. I'll say, hi, I'll just give a name, Vijay Krishna. I'm doing a submit. So you see there's an error, it is coming. If you see this is the error, why the error is coming is, we'll talk about error, but why the error is so descriptive is, if you remember we talked about debug. So I have set up that debug equal to true. That's why the error is coming this way. Because unless you set debug equal to true, you will not see the information coming properly. Okay, that's the part of it. And now coming to the error, it is why the error is coming. Let's look at it. What we are doing here. Okay, we are typing this and doing a submit, and it says immutable object nm is not callable. Says demo file and login. It's not able to resolve the URL. That's what it says. I'm just stopping it and running it back again. Now the server is there. Form data routing redirect. Okay, this is a different page altogether. We are redirecting to the correct URL. The form name is nm, right? Let's see if this doesn't fix, then I have to look at I have to restart the PyCharm. Yeah, I need to restart PyCharm. This is something to do with PyCharm. So even if normal program we run, that shouldn't happen now. The earlier one, I do notice this problem earlier as well. Okay, this is working. There seems to be some problem here. Okay, we'll check that anyway. I just don't want to spend more time here. So then we have another concept called templates. So now earlier what we did here, we actually wrote the code in one HTML file, and from that HTML file we are trying to read and process it, right? That's what we are doing. But do you think this is the correct way? Because when you're doing web development, it is not just one HTML. There will be bunch of HTML coming. Now, how you say I want to say this HTML or that HTML I want to do? You cannot say here, at least you are just relying on this particular login URL route when the page opens this HTML and based on you're doing, but that's not a correct approach. So the basic, the actual best practice is all these HTML files, that means all this front end code, it has to live in something called a templates folder like this. In that template folder, you should put all the code, and you have to use the templating just like the 𝐭𝐻𝐻 template engine we talked about, and from here you have to pass whatever the data you need to pass there. That's the actual idea. So let me show you what I mean. Like here, now you see it says hello Mr. or Mrs. Ravi. So this code, if you see, I have used the templating which we are going to talk now. So here I didn't wrote any code to say hello Mr. or Mrs. Ravi, because if you see there is no code here. It is just this URL route it takes and just calls this function. And what this function does is, this is, if you see here, I have written a basic HTML, but this is actually a HTML page, and this is that HTML page. And this HTML page I haven't put in the code. Now from where it is coming? So like I said, the proper way is to put in a folder called templates, which Flask automatically picks it out. And here is what I said, hello Mr. or Mrs. And any name I can give. And this is like a substitution placeholder where I am passing from this. You see, I'm saying whenever somebody gives hello, whatever name it is, you just call this HTML, you just render this HTML and you pass whatever username they have given. This username, whatever I am passing, I am binding it to name, and that name gets substituted here. That's what happens. So like this, if I want, I can give, if I say Harini, it automatically say hello Mr. or Mrs. Harini. So it's like in HTML page we are putting the view, and that view or the presentation we are modifying based on the user input. It's like dynamic thing we are bringing here. That's what we are doing, and that's the concept of discussion here on templates, where that's the same thing we are doing here. Rather than binding everything in your code like this, if you put everything in the HTML, now it actually breaks the software development, right? Because what would happen is, see, there is a backend developer, there is a front-end developer. Front-end developer will be focusing on HTML designing, CSS, JavaScript. Backend developer will be focusing on your Python and all. If you put everything in one single code, both cannot work on the same time, right? So to separate it out, the good thing is if you separate the HTML, both can work parallelly and they can deliver fastly, right? And that's the whole concept of MVC also, model view controller. Your view should be separate from the controller and the model. So here what we did, this HTML part we separated using the templating concept. And instead of doing this, which is not a right way, what we did is we use this Jinga2 template, which is what Flask provides. And you see, this is what we did. We separated the HTML and put in a templates folder so that Flask automatically picks it up from there. And after that, what we did, whenever we start the server using this particular script, it automatically renders hello.html, and based on whatever username user gives, it automatically gets substituted here. So this way, my front-end developer who works on this and my back-end developer who works on this can work independently and parallelly and can deliver my project faster. And there is no dependency. Tomorrow, if I want to extend this code back-end one, I can easily extend. This one also I can easily scale. That's the best advantage I get here. And this is one of the best features of all this template system provided web development frameworks. In fact, Django has it. Django has its own templating language called DTL, which is Django templating language. And similarly, like we have seen this, you can pass the score and all, you can do that. This one also, you can even process it in the HTML. If you want to process it, one thing to remember is this template itself is a small language inside these. They are not separate language, but it's like a small language where it talks about certain attributes. Like if you want to do if, any of the if or for loops you want to do, you have to enclose it in this flower braces percentage flower braces. And you have to end these with end if it is if conditions. If it is for loop, you have to end with end for, and the normal for loop, how you write like that. Okay, and if it is just variable, we have seen just variable means just variable value you want, just you can put in 2 flower braces. That's it. So those are a very simple syntax we need to remember in order to do this templating. Now another example, the same thing here, we can pass dictionary also, and that dictionary how they read it, like I said, for loop, flower braces, and you can put your for loop also here. And this is just a dictionary, how you get items from a dictionary, and you are getting a key value here. And you are putting a table. If you see, it's a TD tag and TH tag. This is for header and this is for value. Now static files. So when I say static files, even in HTML, what are the static files? Your HTML is basically a static file, and your JSS, your CSS is a static file, right? Those static files also Flask do support. But here, these Flask or all this different kind of languages which we have. So this is basically just says hello. This is a static file. It doesn't change. But if you see here, based on my dictionary input, here I have fixed it. But if I want to change it, I can always change. But this page is not fixed. It's dynamic, because based on what I pass from this, which is my actual backend code, this automatically changes. This is the dynamic code, whereas this is a static code. It never changes. And Flask request object, that means once you get a request here, if you remember, we are not doing anything like what is the header to pass, what is the cookies to process, nothing we are doing. It is automatically getting processed and sending it. Till now, whatever examples we have seen, everywhere we didn't worry about how the HTTP header is, how to send the HTTP response. We just said return and things worked. This and all is what Flask does. And every request object which Flask process contains all this information, like form, which will have information of key value parameters of whatever, a key value of whatever form parameters you pass. Arguments, that means when you pass the URL parameters, the query string, those are all will be passed as part of args. And cookies, if at all client cookies are there, that is passed as part of this particular key. And if there is any files uploaded, that is part of this key. And what is the method, whether it's a get method, post method, put method, delete method, or upload method, all that will come here. The HTTP methods we are talking about here. And what is cookies? Cookies basically is a client-side key value pair, I would say, and it helps them to track or identify who is the client talking to me, or if you want to identify that, then cookies is one of the mechanism. And you can always set cookie and read from here. This is your HTML, and from here you're just rendering this index.html, which is this. And further, if you want, you can always process. We have seen some example like this, right? Request.form and all, we can process and we can render that particular cookie also as a response to the user. Now, similarly, if you want redirection, we have seen one kind of redirection. If you remember, redirect function we already used, where if you remember guest and admin, whenever the user is admin, we are redirecting to one page. If not, we are redirecting to the guest page, right? That's the same thing being discussed here, where this is the location you're going to give and what is the status code and response. Here in our case, if you look at, we have seen in this example, so we have seen here as well as here also. No, this is not the one. There is this guest example and already, yeah, this one. You see, this is what we have seen earlier, right? The guest page, admin page and all. So based on whether the URL name has admin, you redirect to hello admin. If the URL is not admin, does not contain admin, you redirect to the guest page. And that's the same thing being discussed here. And apart from redirecting, if you want, you can send these error codes also, like HTTP not found or redirection. All these error codes also you can send. There is a set of separate functions for it also. And if you want to abort, you have this function in Flask to abort the request. Now, if you remember in the initial thing I said, basically Flask is a micro framework. So here micro means that all the core things of the server is built in a simpler way. And if you want to extend, you can always extend using these extensions. It is not like a framework where it gives something to you and you have to live with. If you look at Django, Django has something called a model, which is called database model, which is actually interfaces with the database part of it, where by default it is SQLite is there. If you want, you can add other plugins also. But Django doesn't put that also. Flask doesn't put that also. What Flask says is, hey, these SQL or email or other kind of things, Ajax or whatever you want, these are all like you should be having like plugins, and I will leave up to the user to decide which one they want. So they provided as part of the extensions rather than putting in the framework itself. Whereas in the web application framework like Django, at least the database part is integrated. Whereas here it is not integrated. These all comes with as extensions. So if you want to integrate any database support, you can use this Flask SQL-𝐴𝐶𝐚E. If you want to do anything on WTF, you can use this Flask ATF. And if you want to do anything on email, this Flask Mail. And this Flask Ajax is for any of the Ajax things to use or jQuery. These are all extensions which are available through Flask and you can integrate and use it. But these are all not provided by default with whatever framework, at least the Flask, it doesn't provide it. Okay, see you all. Bye.